So let's look at another aspect. Those of you that understand that everything we do, we tend to pathologize. So how many of you are familiar with J. Marion Sims? J. Marion Sims. How many women in the audience know what a vaginal speculum is? Okay. So I bet you the brothers that we lost you on that. It's an instrument that is used to peer into the vagina. It was created by this J. Marion Sims. It was credited to this day as being the wealthiest physician to have ever lived, given that. So let's read about what he did. J. Marion Sims was a physician in the mid-1800s who was credited with the creation of the first vaginal speculum, which was made from a pewter spoon. Sims had built a makeshift hospital in his backyard where he conducted surgical experiments on plasticized African slave women. Sims reasoned that slave women were able to bear great pain because their race made them more durable, and thus they were well suited for painful medical experimentation. Because you know, Thomas, that we felt less pain, we didn't need sleep, and we didn't feel grief. That's really convenient, isn't it? So now we understand, well, how did they get these women? Where these women come from that Sims got? So now let's go back and take a, well, they were to Sims, and the people would complain. Each one of these slave masters would bring these women in, and they'd say, this young woman here is not fit for duty. And Sims would look at these women, and indeed they from something called a vaginal fistula. You might have heard about this. Oprah talked about it. The woman on there was talking about a vaginal fistula. And a vaginal fistula often occurs during childbearing when a woman will tear so deeply that it will tear through the urinary tract and the bladder. And in fact, you will see feces and urine that will drip through uncontrollably. It does heal, but it smells and it's very uncomfortable, and it's really a horrible state, largely due to the smelliness of it. But if you are in fact one of those women that have a vaginal fistula, can you still work the fields? You can work the fields. You'll be smelly, maybe uncomfortable, but you can work the fields. Can you sweep and clean in the house? Can you feed the animals? Well, then what makes her, J. Marion Sims, unfit for duty? I need to have sexual access. So you need to fit so that I can do her, because that is her duty to me. Okay, so this is why they came to J. Marion Sims, and let's take a look at why they thought this was all okay. And it has to do with pathologizing race. You see, because by pathologizing, making race a sick thing, then you therefore justify your behavior to remove the cognitive. Yes, you're listening. That's right. You got to remove that dissonance. So now, their first pathological symptom was their primary racial characteristic, their skin color. In a medical world that categorized life as either normal, which is dichotomous thinking, people of the African diaspora were continually condemned to the category of pathological, their abnormal skin color serving as a foil for normal white skin. Pathological causes for this condition were concocted in order to explain its prevalence. But how come there's so many of these black people if it's a pathological thing? Here is what the favorite theory that arose out of the scientific medical journals. These people, the skin color and attendant physiognomy of the black, are the result of congenital leprosy. They decided that's what's wrong. If you're black out there, you got congenital leprosy. That's why you're black. Such medical arguments in collusion with racist and stereotypic scientific and cultural explanations grounds for differential treatment. Second pathological symptom. The second symptom was gender. Black females who were perceived to be irreligious, lustful, and immoderate. Well, my God, that is really convenient. Here is the proof. They're putting buttocks and genitals were offered as physical evidence of their pathology. Anybody with a big butt? Then it gets a little deeper. This one where I just really had to, I couldn't believe this one. And some people have heard about this particular symptom. Samuel Cartwright argued, this was a 19th century physician, that two particular forms of mental illness caused by disorders were prevalent among slaves. One was drapetomania, which was diagnosable by one single symptom. the uncontrollable urge to escape from slavery. They pathologized not wanting to be a slave. Pathologizing. Then there was a second one, Dysesthesia aethiopica, which revealed symptoms: destroying property on the plantation, being disobedient, and talking. What I'm saying here is that you have to pathologize. Journals have been written about this, all to justify the behavior of what they did to remove the dissonance. So more seriously, when we look at the nature of the injury, y'all are all free. But I want you to take a look at what happened and what I mean by transgenerational impact. Transgenerational, along a continuum, generational trauma. If you are a slave mother and you are going to prepare your children for adulthood, yes? Yes. There had been something called rites of passage, which is movement from your childhood into adult, meaningful work in support of the Klan. Rites of passage. We have now adopted the term adolescence, which is a new term, by the way. It was developed in Europe, which now gives young people permission to lose their minds. We just say, oh yeah, they're adolescent. Not in my house. I guess they just didn't get to be adolescent in my house. We did then began to give them permission to be insane during that period. But before that, we had rites of passage. And if I'm a slave mother and I'm a good mother, I am going to prepare my daughter to be raped. Come on now, I'm not going to let my little girl walk into that mind, am I? Not as a good mother. I wouldn't do that to her, so I'm going to say baby, and I'm not going to wait till she's 18, assuming it's going to start. I got to pull her out at 8, 9, and 10 and say, baby, here is what happened to you. Here is what may or may not do to you, and this is what you might want to make it hurt less, and baby, don't scream. They make it worse for you. And baby, they come, and I don't know if it's one or two or a group of them, and I don't know how many times, but surely they're, baby, this is what they will do. If I'm a good mother, I will prepare my daughter for pathology. And when that night comes to wrestle her way, her father stands next to me, helpless, as she begs him to help her. But y'all are free. And what we have to understand is the nature of that injury. What it did to emulate the father, to prepare her daughter for something she could not humanly think was made for her. And then she had her own traumas. And remember, mama hypervigilant. And daddy has got outbursts of violence because he never got a chance to heal from his injuries. So then they said, but y'all were free. So now the second question is, after American chattel slavery officially ended, trauma stopped. So not only you're not getting healing from the original trauma, the traumas continued. Yes, I don't want to make it up. Am I telling the truth? Okay, well, let me go back to history in case folks, do you know who Emmett Till was that during slavery? It was not, but let's go back and look at what happened directly after slavery, because directly after slavery officially ended, meaning someone crossed the T and dotted the I, do you think they stopped enslaving us? No. So you had something called peonage. You can do the research. Peonage means the unlawful selling of slaves back into slavery. So there was a fair number that said, I don't care what you say, I'm going to keep my slaves. And then when they got broken down and caught, they moved to the next level. They said, well, you know, we can't re-enslave. You know, but we're going to develop some codes. We're going to make it so there is nowhere for them to go. So that means that if you enter this city and unless you work for a white person and they've signed off, you better not be here. You have no place to be unless someone white is being taken care of by you. And then they said, well, we can't do that anymore. Lord, can we? So that's when we created something called convict lease. If you want to know where the original overpopulation of black people in the criminal justice system began, it began with the convict lease laws. So now they're saying, well, can't we lease them? Well, in order to lease them, they got to be in jail, don't they? So now we figure out how to get them in mass in jail. Did you look at a white woman? No, get 100 years of lynching so you can understand the kinds of things they were arrested for. So now we have all of these chain gangs, and 25% of them died while under convict lease because there was no protection for them. But y'all are free. And then we had the civil rights movement, right? And prior to that, you know, when we start to get the whole notion of how to live, you had sharecropping, right? But they didn't really share, did they? So when we start looking at that, you became, it's basically indentured servitude, only worse. And then we said, well, separate but equal. And truth be told, during separate but equal, you know, that's when, you know, the Klan arose and Reconstruction, all those things began to happen. You look at that whole notion of what happened to us, the promise of freedom. And during segregation, actually, we were doing quite well. You know why? Because we had to depend on one another. We had to get beyond the lack of trust we had because we were all we had. And so, Baker I went to. And you were the school I brought my children to. And you were the hairdresser. That's who you were for me. You were my community. You were my tribe. We economically blossomed. Tulsa, Black Wall Street. And what they did was they leveled us. And I know that people had a ribbon on because they said the worst disaster on American soil, the act of violence, was the Oklahoma 171 people. We had a moment of silence for them. Who tied a ribbon on for the 300 that died in Tulsa? How come we didn't know that? They didn't count as human, or they were trying to run from the dissonance. So what we have to understand is, how long then have we been free? 38, 39 years? But y'all are free. You see, yeah, but Joy, that was a long time ago. Surely you don't think that we now possess the behaviors or any... Well, let's take a look at that. And I'll share with you some of those behaviors, because, you know, it's called adaptation. It's learning to adapt to living in a hostile environment. We have normalized, we in this room have normalized our injury to such a degree that, and of course, white people have a disincentive for us to look, because then they got a mirror. And so let's take a look at what it might look like up close and personal with you and I. Because, you know, we learn from the generation that precedes us.
From slavery to segregation, from civil rights to cultural appropriation, Black America has endured centuries of structural violence and exploitation. As mentioned by Dr. Joy, you had the demonic medical apartheid during slavery and Jim Crow. During slavery, Black bodies were exploited for scientific research without consent. Enslaved people were dissected, experimented on, and operated on without anesthesia. Dr. J. Marion Sims, often called the father of modern gynecology, perfected his techniques on enslaved Black women like Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy, without pain relief. During Jim Crow, Black Americans were denied basic medical care, segregated from white hospitals, and subjected to horrific studies, like the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, where Black men were left untreated for decades just to study the disease's progression. Also, you have the racist objectification and mockery of Black women's bodies. In the early 1800s, Sarah Baartman, a South African woman with a naturally large posterior, was paraded in European freak shows as the Hottentot Venus. Her body was sexualized, mocked, and displayed, both in life and death. Fast forward to the 20th and 21st centuries, Black women continued to face ridicule for their natural curves, deemed ghetto or inappropriate. Yet today, white celebrities mimic Black aesthetics, big lips, big hips, braids, and are celebrated for it. The same features once ridiculed are now glorified, just not on Black women. White supremacy is ingrained in American institutions, home, school, religion, and politics. And those who fear history reveal their own guilt. They know that an honest telling of America's past would destroy the illusion of innocence. It happened when the world saw Black Wall Street burn. It happened when the brutality of Jim Crow was exposed. It happened when the Southern strategy was unmasked as a tool of racial control rather than democracy. The systems of oppression never disappeared. They evolved. Slave patrols became modern policing. Redlining became housing discrimination. The plantation became the prison. And through it all, America has attempted to erase its crimes. Native lands were stolen through laws. Black freedmen Americans were denied land and wealth-building opportunities. Immigration policies were designed to maintain a white majority. When black communities thrived, they were targeted by mobs, by bombings, and by policies disguised as justice. It was not enough to take lives. They had to erase entire communities. Highways were built through black neighborhoods. COINTELPRO was used to assassinate black leaders. Confederate statues were erected not in 1865, but during the Civil Rights Movement as a message of intimidation. And still, they expect us to believe in their version of America, one where slavery was just an unfortunate chapter, where the Tuskegee experiment is a footnote, where mass incarceration is an accident. But the truth cannot be erased. The real fear is not history itself. It is the reckoning that comes when people realize they have been lied to. A generation that understands the depth of deception will not trust blindly. And when trust is broken, people begin to question everything. That is what America fears most. Not its past, but the consequences of its lies. And no matter how many books they ban, how many voices they silence, how many distortions they spread, the truth remains. It spreads like fire, igniting minds and demanding accountability. The real question is not whether America will face its past. The question is whether America can survive what it has done. The fight to suppress history is not just about the past, it's about controlling the future. Look at the policies still in place today. Voter suppression laws disproportionately target black communities, just as literacy tests and poll taxes once did. The school-to-prison pipeline funnels black children into a system designed to break them before they can build. Discriminatory banking practices, like higher interest rates for black borrowers, continue the legacy of redlining. These aren't relics of history, they are present-day realities. And when we fight back, they criminalize us. The same government that calls Martin Luther King Jr. a national hero today labeled him the most dangerous man in America when he was alive. The same system that praises the civil rights movement now has laws banning protests that challenge police violence. The same corporations that post Black History Month ads are the ones funding politicians who strip black voting rights. They want us to forget. They want us to believe that history is behind us. But it isn't. Because the forces that upheld slavery, segregation, and racial violence are still at work, just under different names. The past is not dead. It is still shaping the present. And until we confront that truth, history will continue to repeat. The solution to these systemic issues lies in a conscious effort to rebuild Black economic independence, cultural unity, and family structure. Key strategies include: Black Americans must prioritize supporting Black-owned businesses, spending within their own community, creating a sustainable economic cycle similar to those in other racial and ethnic groups. Initiatives such as group economics, cooperative economics, and Black business directories can help redirect resources back into Black communities. Freedmen, Black Americans have to get back to strengthening Black families. The Black family unit has historically been a source of strength and resilience. Rebuilding strong familial structures through mentorship, education, and economic support can provide a foundation for generational wealth and stability. Also, teaching future generations on the importance of cultural identity, such as promoting Black history, traditions, and self-determination through community-based institutions, media, and social movements will help reinforce a sense of identity and pride. Last but not least, political and economic advocacy is a must. Freedmen, Black Americans must advocate for policies that specifically benefit their community, rather than broadly applied initiatives that dilute their impact. This includes pushing for reparations, land ownership, and economic incentives tailored to descendants of enslaved Black Americans. So yeah, integration was intended to supposedly provide Black Americans with equal opportunities, but in many ways, it disrupted the economic and cultural self-sufficiency of freedmen, Black Americans. By prioritizing Black economic empowerment, cultural identity, and family unity, freedmen Black Americans can reclaim their lost progress and build a future of collective prosperity. The time has come to reinvest in our own communities and redefine success on our own terms. The civil rights movement is often hailed as a victory, a moment in history where America finally made good on its promises of equality. But for freedmen, descendants of enslaved Black Americans, it was anything but a victory. In many ways, the movement left us worse off, thanks to a combination of leadership betrayals, failed policies, and deceptive labels that diluted our struggle. One of the biggest failures of the movement was the emergence of Black leaders who prioritized their own political and financial gain over the needs of the freedmen community. Many of these so-called leaders compromised with white institutions in exchange for personal access to wealth and political influence. They embraced superficial integration while ignoring the long-term economic and social impact on Black communities. Rather than pushing for reparations, land ownership, and economic self-sufficiency, they settled for token positions in white-dominated spaces, leaving the masses behind. Affirmative action was another policy that was supposed to uplift Black Americans, but in practice, it disproportionately benefited white women and non-Black immigrants. Instead of addressing the specific injustices faced by freedmen, these policies became a catch-all for any marginalized group, diluting the intended impact. White women became the largest beneficiaries, securing jobs and educational opportunities that should have gone to freedmen. Meanwhile, Black immigrants, who had not suffered from American slavery and segregation, were lumped into the same category as freedmen, further pushing us to the margins. Perhaps the most damaging consequence of the civil rights movement was the introduction of minority and multicultural labels. These terms blurred the lines between the unique struggle of freedmen and the experiences of other racial and ethnic groups. Policies that were meant to address the oppression of freedmen were opened up to anyone who wasn't white, turning the fight for Black justice into a general diversity initiative. Corporations, universities, and the government all embraced diversity as a way to appear progressive while avoiding direct investments in the freedmen community. The fight for reparations was diluted into broader social justice causes that often left Black Americans without targeted benefits. The result? Our unemployment rates remain high, our wealth gap has barely improved, and the systemic barriers that were supposed to be dismantled still stand firm. One of the most urgent needs in the Black community today is the presence of strong legal minds who can fight for true justice. We need more attorneys and strategists like Thurgood Marshall and Johnnie Cochran, visionaries who understood that real power comes from mastering the legal system and using it to advance the interests of freedmen. We must establish think tanks that bring together legal experts, economists, and policy strategists to create a unified agenda for economic and legal justice. These groups must push for reparations, fair housing policies, and legal protections against discrimination that specifically target the issues facing freedmen. Without a dedicated legal and economic strategy, we will continue to see our demands ignored and our communities left behind. The battle is not just in the streets. It must be fought in the courts, in boardrooms, and in legislative chambers where real change is made. If we are to correct the failures of the civil rights movement, we must first acknowledge them. We must push back against the leaders who sell us out for personal gain. We must rebuild Black economic power by supporting our own businesses and institutions. Most importantly, we must reject blanket policies that treat all minorities the same and demand reparations and policies specifically for freedmen Black Americans. The time for symbolic victories is over. It's time for real, tangible justice. Tell me what you think about this topic. Hope you find the information in this video informative. Feel free to like, subscribe, share, comment. Thanks for watching.